after. Gentlemen, welcome to the Planning Committee of Telford and Ricky Council. Can I ask everyone to turn off their mobile phones, please? We're all councillors, so I don't need them. Right. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence.
Councillor Loveridge, who is being substituted by Councillor Wellington, and Councillor Offland, whose substitute is Councillor Lavery.
We've got a full house. Okay. Declaration of interest. Can I say that the first item on the agenda is opposed by Telford and is opposed by Rockland Wood and Trench Parish Council, of which I'm a member. But when we have planning meetings, I absent myself from the meeting, and it's minuted as such that I leave a meeting and then I return. So I don't part of the discussion at all. Any other declarations of interest? Right. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they a true and correct record? All in favour? Any against? None against. Are there any deferred or withdrawn applications?
There are none, Chair.
None, right. Item 5, site visit. Any planned?
No, Chair.
Not at the moment. Okay. Plan application for determination. And I'll do them in the order they are on the paper. So 6.1 is the site of 2 Elim Terrace, Trench Road, Trench. Amy.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of a 3-bedroom dwelling to be used as a house of multiple occupation, or HMO as we'll refer to it throughout. The detached property proposed will be located in the side and rear garden of the existing property, number 2 Elim Terrace. The property would be set back from within the site, and an access track would be provided leading to the rear of the property, where a parking area is proposed to provide shared parking for the new dwelling and number 2 Elim Terrace, with allocated parking spaces for each. Number 2 Elim Terrace would have a new garden area sectioned off from the proposed HMO. The application is before committee members at the request of Councillor Shirley Reynolds. An amended plan was submitted during the course of the application to overcome comments raised by the Council's Highways Officer, and a reconsultation has taken place following these changes.
Thank you, Amy. Steve Reynolds. Councillor Steve Reynolds, please.
Okay. 3 minutes, Steve, when you start. Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, right. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to speak against this application, which has been of great concern of many residents of the effects of this proposed development over quite a few years now. It is clear that there has been no real significant change to these plans from the previous applications that were refused on both occasions. I think namely 2020 and I think prior to that was 2015. And the same arguments still remain, as there are no significant material changes. The concerns regarding the proximity of the development to the Trench Lock interchange A442 and the added increase to the volume of vehicles utilising the site on the busy Trench Road, which continues to be a road of continued traffic issues, namely speeding and parking. Trench Road is also notorious for traffic problems, and ward members have been campaigning for traffic calming measures along Trench Road, and again this development will cause further problems. This is a totally inappropriate development of the land and surrounding area, for by design the property is out of keeping with the characteristics of the area, and being identified as an HMO, this would bring additional vehicles upon the roads and services on Trench Road. It is common knowledge that residents have experienced long contracted work on the poor drainage and water supply issues along Trench Road, and this would further exacerbate the problems. The environmental impact regarding trees, wildlife and the natural habitat would be greatly affected, as this planned development skirts the Silking Way and the rights of way accessing the middle pool, and any suggestions to remove trees on this site that clearly acts as a natural buffer for noise and pollution reduction from the A442 Eastern Primary. Silking Way is also part of the Road Safety for Children scheme, and the safe route that runs along this plot is for the schools at Teaksbridge primary and nursery schools. To finalise from the report, the recommendation to the Planning Committee is to grant planning permission subject to an extensive list of conditions. My question and concern of residents is what has changed since the previous applications for this development that were refused, and the new application shows no significant changes to change this particular view. I ask the Planning Committee to refuse this planning application that will have a detrimental effect on this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Amy, it's back to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of a 3-bedroom property to be used as HMO. In terms of the principle of development, the site is located within the built-up area of the borough, as defined within the local plan, and as such it is a sustainable location for new development close to local amenities in Trench. The scale and design and massing of the proposal is reflective of the adjacent terraces, and as appropriate parking, access arrangements and amenity space have been provided, the scale, design and massing can be accepted on balance. A number of concerns were raised during the course of the application, which have been addressed in detail within the report to committee. These predominantly consisted of increased increased traffic movements to and from the site in close proximity to Trench Lock, parking arrangements, the use of the building as a HMO, removal of trees and impact upon wildlife, poor drainage in the vicinity, the presence of a right-of-way at the rear of the site, lack of consultation with residential properties affected by this, and the previous reasons for refusal not being overcome. In terms of the increased traffic and parking, whilst it is appreciated that Trench Road is often very busy, the increase in traffic associated with one additional dwelling would not result in any significant impacts upon the highway, and officers considered the parking arrangements on site would create a betterment to the existing arrangement. The scheme proposes an access track measuring 3.1 metres in width, which would run down the side of the property towards the rear, and the current parking area at the front of the site would be reduced in width. These elements would ensure residents do not park right in front of the site and would need to drive down and use the turning area at the rear, allowing them to leave the site in forward gear. With regards to the use of the property as a HMO, the property would be a small HMO with less than 6 residents, and as such the impact from a planning perspective would be no different to that associated with a typical 3-bedroom dwelling. In addition, the landowner could construct the property as a family dwelling and then change the use to a small HMO once the property has been finished and occupied without actually requiring planning permission. And as such, there would be no reasonable grounds from a planning perspective to object on this basis. In terms of drainage, the applicant proposes to connect into the mains drainage for foul disposal, and a soakaway is proposed for surface water drainage, both of which have been accepted by the council's drainage officer, and no concern has been raised by them in this respect. With regards to trees and wildlife, it's acknowledged that some trees on the site itself were felled prior to the application coming forward, and some pruning of the adjacent trees has taken place as well. However, a tree survey has been submitted and the council's tree officer has raised no objection to this, subject to conditions for landscaping and tree replacements on the site itself. The ecology officer has also raised no objection because the woodland that has been looked at is outside of the application boundary. I'll just note as well regarding the previous reasons for refusal. Now, the 2015 application proposed a larger property and was set much further forward within the site itself, so it was only able to provide one parking space at the front of the site, which would have meant that only one car could park there. It didn't provide any parking spaces for number 2 Elim Terrace, and it would mean that that single car would have had to reverse out onto Trench Road, and as a result it resulted in sort of really significant highway safety concerns in that respect. So that's why that one was refused. And then in 2020, again, a plan did come forward similar to what's proposed now actually, but the applicant didn't provide a great deal of detail on the access arrangements, and the width of the plot, the width of the parking at the front was still retained to be the same as it is now. So cars wouldn't necessarily be encouraged to drive down the track, turn around and come back out in forward gear. They would still likely park on the front and reverse out. So that was something we weren't particularly supportive of. And in addition to that, we asked for a tree survey because there were quite a lot of council-owned trees that overhang the boundary, and we wanted to ensure that the roots would be protected. As those details weren't provided, and the applicant didn't come forward with those details, we were pushed to issue a refusal notice for that one. However, obviously the current application has come forward and addressed those concerns. Now, scale, design and massing was flagged in that as a reason for refusal as well, simply because on the whole we considered that actually when you look at the scale and design in terms of, if you look at the scale and design along with the parking arrangements and how those weren't really working, they weren't particularly, it was worthy of a refusal as a whole. Whereas actually when we look at the scale and design now, that is the only thing that stood out as perhaps not the most perfect arrangement. However, on balance, with these other issues being addressed and a betterment being created from the access track and parking arrangements being improved, we were able to, on balance, accept the scale and design of the proposal. As a result of these conclusions, the recommendation remains as outlined in the report to committee, which is to grant full planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Amy. Out to the committee. Peter Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've been a bit blindsided by this in a way, because the applicant, instead of come forward with a 3-bedroom house, I don't think we're going to be speaking about this tonight, for whatever reason they've come forward as an HMO, which puts people's backs up. I can imagine locally people don't know who's going to come, but I don't think that's something that we can actually discuss in this committee. We can't say yes or no on the idea that someone we don't like may come and live there. So as it stands, I mean, okay, you can argue about there being possibly 6 people in the house and only 3 parking spaces, but we don't know that's fact either. We just know that they want to build a house on a space that appears to be reasonable. So I personally am struggling to see any planning reasons why we should reject it, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Rick?
Thanks, Chair. We went to have a look at this, the site visit, and I mean, it's just a 1 3-bedroom house, and there's plenty of room to accommodate anything that's needed. There might be may not be an issue for parking, but there are 3 spaces for parking, and normally with the house you've got 2 parking spaces. And on the whole, I think, I can't find any planning reason to say to refuse it.
Thank you, Rick. Anybody else? Bob?
Yeah, thank you. I went and had a look around this afternoon and couldn't see any problems. I'm just looking at page 27 now, where the parking arrangements are, and it may not be something we could. It might not be discussable, but the parking places, just looking at them, seem in the wrong place.
Some more parking spaces.
Yes, but those 2 belong. The 2 there belong to number 2, and the ones for the house belong to the ones in the other corner. It just seems to me it would be better if the 2 parking places for number 2 were at the back of the garden for number 2, and the parking places for the HMO were at the back of the garden where the HMOs are.
Nigel?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't make the site visit, but I had a look. I have gone and had a look at it anyway, and I mean, I don't have a problem per se with it. But my biggest concern is the fact that it's so close to Trench Lock, the junction, and I'm well aware of the traffic issues along there because I drive along there myself quite frequently. The thing is, though, that I'm just a bit concerned about traffic exiting it because of parked vehicles, and it's quite narrow because you've got parked vehicles on both sides. That then any vehicles exiting are going to have to pull quite far out into the road, and it's not that wide particularly. So I do have a bit of concern on that with regards to the safety aspect of it.
Thank you, Nigel. Amy, do you want to come back to all the points?
Yes, please. So with regards to the parking spaces themselves, we haven't included any sort of specific condition to allocate those parking spaces specifically. We have included a condition which says that the parking needs to be carried out, laid out prior to commencement, etc. But that is something we could look into, if that's more feasible.
Sorry, as Jancy said to me, it may be if they're not allocated, anyone in number 2 or anyone in the 3, they can park anywhere in those 5. I don't know, but I thought it was like those 2 there were definitely for number 2.
I think what we can do is just require almost a management scheme as to how those spaces would be allocated to the property. Again, that's to ensure that both properties have the required allocation of parking spaces. So yes, in an ideal world, I think what's marked up as spaces 2 and because you've got 1 and 2 and then 2, 2 and 3. So I think it would be best if probably the 2, 2 just behind number 2 would be allocated to number 2 and vice versa. But we can work that out to ensure that
That would make more sense. I think.
And then in respect of the sort of highway safety issue, appreciate it is like we said, appreciate it is a busy road. There are some white line markings on there to sort of prevent you parking on certain elements of it. And I suppose what we would suggest as well is that it is already used as an access, and at the moment, if that parking area was full, people would have to reverse in and out of there. And so I suppose in terms of this, it is a betterment because they'd be forced to turn around and exit in forward gear. I think it's probably safer to exit in forward gear rather than reversing out as they do now. So whilst it is sort of acknowledged it's not perhaps the best arrangement, we think it does improve what's there now.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Ian?
Yes, Chairman. Well, first of all, I was a bit of a disadvantage is that I never received any papers for this meeting like I normally do. So I've had to go on to the computer, which I can't see very well. And I also missed the site visit because I don't seem to have received a notification about that. However, I know the junction, and I'm looking at it now on Google Maps, and it is quite a large site, so it'll come, as far as I can see, it will adequately accommodate not only the new property but the proposed parking. It's quite clear from this view on Google Maps that the current parking means vehicles actually reverse onto the Trench Road. This is going to be virtually eliminated, provided that the residents are advised on the way to drive in and drive out. It looks like actually most of the vehicles on that section of the Trench Road, numbers 4, 5, 6, 10, etc., they all seem to reverse onto the main road, so we may be helping the traffic movement for safety reasons. There are no planning reasons for rejecting it, Chairman, so I would have to support it.
Thank you. Janice?
There are some trees not on the site itself, but just very close to the site. If any of those trees should be damaged, could we put something in that they are replaced?
As they're outside the application boundary, we can't condition it as part of the application, but what I would say is they are council-owned trees, so we would have separate powers to look at that. And also they don't have tree preservation orders on, they're not protected in that respect. We do, with the tree survey does, I believe, have a tree protection plan, or we've requested one, and so we could ensure that the trees aren't damaged during the construction, because there'll be fencing put up.
I've seen several areas recently where trees have been damaged, and we have made them, whoever's responsible, replace the trees like for like.
I think it's just because they're outside of the development boundary.
Yeah.
You've got, at the minute, you'll see it on the site, to the kind of side boundary and the rear boundary, you've got a fairly established and quite robust close-bordered fencing, which in itself should offer quite a reasonable degree of protection. Certainly, when I kind of peeked my head over the fence at the back, in terms of the actual trunks and the main kind of parts of the trees, they were set quite a way away from the boundary, so certainly the kind of protective tree fencing should achieve the objective that you kind of see.
Having visited the site today, there was one where obviously branches have been cut off already, and I've seen a few lately where the roots have been damaged, and we've had to bring the tree itself down. So I'm just saying, I think we should have something in there, and this is right where the house is being built, next to the house. If something should happen, that we should replace that particular tree, because I can see that being damaged. The other thing was about the bins, which I mentioned earlier. You've put an allocated place where people can't park at the front, they have to go up the pathway, and they have to turn around so they can drive out instead of reversing out onto the road, which I can see is an issue on a lot of houses in that area. Can I suggest that the bins are placed in that area at the front there? I don't know. They didn't seem to have an allocated area for bins being placed, but we've so that you can't park a car out the front there.
So I took it on board after you sort of mentioned it on the site visit. We did discuss sort of what options we have. I think we've suggested that because all of the other sort of terrace properties would be typically expected to have their bins at the rear, we would prefer that arrangement, and I think it's likely that would continue through, simply because of where sort of the front door is for the property and things like that. I think they will typically store their bins to the rear. I think it's likely though that they will use that space on collection day, for example, to put their bins out. So we haven't suggested a condition as such, and unless it's really sort of pushed for. But I think we think it would typically follow through the same as the other terraces.
In terms of the grassed area out the front as well, so there's a landscape plan showing that to be kind of grass with the planting as well. So that's a requirement to be retained as well. So that couldn't just kind of be converted to kind of parking, which would kind of override what we're trying to achieve through this development as well. So there is a requirement for that to kind of remain as landscaping as well. So it's pushing people to use the area at the back. And I mean, there were examples as we walked down Trench Road of bins being stored out the front. I think that's kind of an arrangement. A lot of the properties were terrace properties, and it's more convenient to kind of leave them out the front. It's not the most sightly, so if we can kind of put them in the back garden in an enclosed area, it improves the street scene. It makes them quite practical to use, and you can just wheel them out quite easily to the front area on bin collection day. So it's to improve the aesthetics as well.
Okay. Any other comments?
Just a question about HMOs, and this is just my ignorance. There's a communal kitchen and dining, but there's no communal living room. Do they not need a communal living room in an HMO?
In terms of HMOs, quite often the kitchen space as well can be kind of used as a congregating area. Quite often with HMOs, some of the occupants of the properties kind of work shifts or kind of different hours, so there isn't kind of necessarily the need for them to kind of have that shared space. Normally in a kind of kitchen area you can have a TV, maybe a couple of seats as well, so there's the opportunity for kind of mixing, but there isn't that requirement. And all the rooms within the property as well are fairly spacious, so if people kind of wanted to gather in the rooms to socialise, I think there's the opportunity for that as well. But as far as I'm aware, there's no requirement for that.
Legal requirement.
And there is guidance from the council's environmental health team, but it is typically the space they expect them to provide is typically lower than what you'd expect in a family property. So what they have provided is in line with that.
In a family property, bedroom 1 would be the living room, wouldn't it?
Okay. No further. Amric.
Can I move it for the recommendation?
Thank you, Amric. Been moved, seconded. All those in favour, please show. Anybody against? No, it's unanimous, that was. Okay. He said there's no planned application, no planning agreements to use it. Right, we now move to the next one, which is 6B, the land west of Hollinshead Way, Old Park. The rule of condition number 2, variation of condition number 3. Mark, this is yours.
Thank you, Chair.
Got your spades, have you?
Pardon?
Got a spade, shovel and spade.
Well, yeah, quite a big shovel and spade. Thank you, Chair. Members should also have received a written update prior to this meeting, hopefully, or certainly the papers are on the desks today, alongside a revised kind of routing plan as well. So this application is a Section 73 application, which means it's seeking to vary or remove conditions attached to a previous planning consent. In this case, the previous consent was granted in 2016 and allowed soil to be imported onto the site for the purposes of surcharging. The process of surcharging involves a specific height and area of soil being placed on part of the site and the settlement of the underlying ground measured for up to a year. The 2016 consent has been implemented but not completed and is therefore extant. At the time, the 2016 consent conditioned the HGV routing to ensure lorries importing soil access the site from the eastern access off Hollinshead Way, conditioned the importation to take place between 7 AM and 7 PM whilst avoiding school drop-off and pick-up hours. Conditioned works to be in accordance with an ecology survey and conditioned the list of approved drawings. These 4 conditions would all need to be varied as part of the newly proposed soil importation. As you can see from the site plan, a separate 2018 consent granted permission for approximately 36,000 cubic metres of soil to be imported and placed in a controlled manner in the area labelled as Mound A. This mound of soil has permission to be up to 5 metres in height and was always planned to be contributed to in an ad hoc manner, as and when appropriate soil became available to bring into the site. Mound A is currently stands at 2 metres in height, so there is still some capacity before it reaches its permitted 5 metre limit. The current planning application seeks to bring additional clean soil onto the site to be similarly stored on the site labelled Mound B. Unlike the 2016 permission, this would not be on an ad hoc basis, as the soil would be bought from a single donor site within the town centre over a 1-month period. This would mean a shorter, more intense period of HGV movement of approximately 120 lorries per day, opposed to 30 lorries under the 2016 consent. The most appropriate way to access Mound B is to bring HGVs in from the western access off Old Park Way, and this is why the condition relating to HGV access needs to be varied. The previous 2016 consent made provision for HGVs to reach the site via Rampart Way and Hall Parkway. Following receipt of an amended plan, this is also the route now proposed from the donor site, and therefore there is a fallback position to be given significant material weight in the consideration of this application. Due to the increased intensity of the soil importation over a 1-month period, the previously consented hours of soil transportation from 7 AM to 7:30 PM are not considered appropriate, as they will coincide with both daily rush hours. For this reason, it has been negotiated with the applicant that the hours of 7:30 AM to 4:30 PM are acceptable. It is not considered necessary to avoid the school drop-off and pick-up hours at this time, as the HGV access will not be off Hollinshead Way, which is heavily used at those times for Thomas Telford School. The 2016 consent was accompanied by an ecological report, and a condition required works to be carried out in accordance with it. As this report would have been valid for 2 years, a new ecological report has been submitted, and a resulting condition requesting works be carried out in accordance with it. The application is supported by consultees subject to conditions as listed within the written update, and the proposals would provide wide benefits in terms of helping the council achieve its carbon neutral aspirations by removing the need for the imported soil to be transported out of the borough and to landfill. The application is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Open to committee. Comments? Nigel, and then Janice.
Yeah, I mean, my only concern is that the new route is not much better than the old route, really. I mean, the traffic round the retail park is quite horrendous, and we're just about to enter the Christmas shopping period, and it's going to be all these heavy goods vehicles mixing up with all the shoppers' traffic, so it's going to have quite a detrimental impact on the retailers at the retail park. And I do think that sort of obviously it's possibly not a reason to refuse it, but I do think that there shouldn't be any transportation on Saturdays to give the commercial people a bit of a break on it. It's either that or else the operation doesn't actually start till January, until after, because obviously we don't want any more closures of any retail at the town centre, and basically this is going to be just a kick in the teeth for the store owners. And I mean, we've got enough empty units as it is, both in the town centre and at the retail park, and here we're wanting to make matters even worse. So I do think that we need to be careful that sort of by sort of supporting this and the development of the town centre, we're not taking a step back during the process.
Okay.
So in terms of the routing for the HGV vehicles, it's actually the same as it was for the 2016 application. The only difference being is that we now know the source that the soil is coming from. In terms of the kind of routing, you'll have seen the original routing plan, which kind of showed the lorries kind of going through a more of a pedestrianised area. So that kind of balance has to be made between the two. There's only a finite number of locations, and there is still that extant permission. In terms of when it would actually take place, we don't know. It may not even kind of take place before Christmas. It could indeed be kind of during January.
But we could condition that to make sure that it doesn't.
I don't believe it would be reasonable to condition that a scheme cannot take place until a certain date. Bearing in mind we have an extant permission, which kind of does allow for spoil to kind of go onto the site now. In theory, I don't believe it would be reasonable to impose a restrictive condition preventing them from starting till January.
Well, we could do it, just make sure that it was weekdays.
Well, we've put quite restrictive hours of operation, so the actual hours are much reduced from the 2016 permission in terms of the movements no longer take place during the kind of evening or late afternoon rush hours. So there's already significant benefit, and to kind of restrict the non-movement on Saturdays as well, it would have quite significant kind of knock-on consequences in terms of the costs and also the length of the length and the duration of the import of soil as well.
Well, costs for the people who are transporting the soil, but cost for the retailers who are trying to recover from the pandemic.
Mark, the route that's on the plan there, is that the route which is designated to go to the M54 and the Stafford Park?
So in terms of the routing,
That's signposted the M54 and Stafford
Yep.
Park.
Yep.
So it's already heavily trafficked. Yeah. Okay. And the retail park, I understand, is not on this road at all.
not explicitly on this section, as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Janice.
My question was also based on very similar as to when. Do we have any idea at all? Is it negotiable at all? Can we just mention it to them? I mean, to me, I don't know if we've got this soil ready to be moved now or when it will be ready to move.
I think we can have a dialogue with the applicant in terms of kind of raising the concerns of the committee, and whether they would kind of be able to implement the scheme kind of outside of those kind of peak kind of Christmas
Where are we
periods.
at the moment with requiring the soil to be moved?
I don't know the exact timeframes as to when they're anticipating the works.
Really don't have that idea.
But it is needed in preparation for the
Yeah.
wider scheme that's coming forward, and it's part of that. So
I can see that
it is
it's
a
difficult, yeah.
wider corporate decision as well, beyond our control.
I mean, in terms of, I don't think the soil is imminently ready to be moved.
I mean, summer holidays would be absolutely ideal because you haven't got.
Ian.
Yes, Chairman. Well, I must admit, when I first had a look at this morning and saw the HGV route proposed, I was horrified. So I did contact the planning officer. I'm thankful that they've actually renegotiated the route and got a different one which avoided problems that I spotted. I think anywhere in Telford, near Telford town centre, there is an amount of traffic, and in fact, the route along Rampart Way and up Hall Park Way, past the access into the Forge Retail Park area and across to Asda, is a route that I use quite often especially at weekends, and the traffic is high, but I get through without any hold up at all, mainly because I'm not going into the retail park, I'm going straight past it. So I think this is a welcome change to the route, and I can support the application.
Thank you, Ian. Bob?
Can I just ask, moving soil's very messy when it comes off one side onto the public road. Is there something here that says they will have to keep the roads free of mud, regular sweeping and things like that?
So in terms of, there is a condition proposed which is a constructive environment management plan, which is to include an anti-mud measures.
Any other comments? No, well, the recommendation before you. Those in favour, please show. Everybody against? Nigel, you're not voting?
No, I abstain.
You're abstaining, right. Good.
Support the retail.
One abstention. That's allowed then. Okay? And with that, I'll call it end the meeting. Thank you all for attending.
There you go, Chair.